Sure, no problem at all. So first of all, to reassure everybody, that is what we expect in it. It's even a little bit better. So I just don't want people to panic and think, oh my God, what a stupid judge and whatever. All that we knew for a year now. I was expecting it last week because I thought it would be a sort of a judgment like that, and that she wanted to get around on not having to discuss it much. She did it on the Monday. What the heck? There are multiple theories for that, but the judgment itself, I'm not surprised. She was this year in January, already so convinced of her reasoning that she wasn't going. She really looks to me like one of those highly academic people that once they've made up their mind and aligned their 15 bullet points, that is it. That's the way she thinks. So having to accept what Tesla's lawyers did, which was highly unconventional. Let me put that. I mean, they played poker, and it's not as if I'm not good in poker, but it's not that they lost, but they didn't have a strong hand, and they were going into it, and we did what we could to support it. But she didn't change her mind. Now, why do I say it's nevertheless a good news? The good news is the lawyers' fees came down a lot. And we were discussing that. I don't know whether you've followed all my legal stuff over the last months and months. In that Dell case, when the Dell case came out of appeal, the appeals judge from the Supreme Court of Delaware had made a clear statement that horrendous lawyers' fees are really against Delaware's reputation and the way this should be. So when that came out, it was somewhere in the summer, July, August, something like that. That gave us hope that the lawyers' fee, the attorney's fee of Tonetta's team were not going to be remunerated as much as they wanted. Let me recall what they wanted. They wanted 29.4 million shares, which as of now would be more than 10 billion. Okay. Now, the funny thing is the judge in her judgment thinks it's 5 billion. That just shows that she has no clue about, how to do calculations and stock prices and whatsoever, but it doesn't matter. So they were going for 29.4 million shares, 10 billion payout. When they realized that was probably not going to fly, they made a second pledge that at the end of their 56-page, I remember that one very well, saying, okay, if we can't have the 29.4 million shares, we'll also go for 1.4 million in cash. So she didn't give them that. She listened partly to Tesla's lawyers and also Amy's law team, who on that particular case was really very strong, saying, this should be something between 10 and 50 million, calculating hours and, old ways of calculating it. In the end, what she did is she used their amount and gave them 15% of that. Why 15%? Completely arbitrary, but nevertheless, it's a good news. I mean, I don't like it, but I much rather go into appeal with a 345 number than with a 1.4 billion or with a 29.4 million share number. So that's the first point. The second is she gave Tesla the choice of paying them these 345 million in cash or in shares. So in fact, that is a good news for us shareholders, because it could just be a dilution of the shares. And I know it sounds a lot, 345 million, but compared to today's valorization of Tesla, it's not. So the starting position is much better. Now, what will happen? I mean, there is no doubt in my mind that Elon will appeal. Even if it would have been only 50 million, he would appeal. He is determined to push this all the way through. And when I say all the way through, what does that mean? Well, the next step is Delaware Supreme Court, which is the appeals court for the Chancery Court. So it will be heard there again. This can take 12 to 18 months, will be all rehashed. And there could actually be appeal from both Tesla for just, her not respecting our second vote and the too high attorney fees, but there could also be simultaneously appeal from the lawyers saying we didn't get enough attorney fees. There could be an appeal on both sides. Doesn't matter whether it's one or both sides. It will go there. Requesting documents will take 3, 4, 5 months, and then it will slowly starting to study it again. End of 25 is optimistic, probably 2026 when we'll hear from them. Now that one could obviously be more in our favor. I mean, I hope it for Delaware, because I mean, Delaware just really put their state in a very precarious situation, but that's not my problem. And then if at the Supreme Court of Delaware it is still not acceptable to Elon, which I think it just will be as long as they don't acknowledge this pay package was correct. Tesla's lawyers want to bring this to the Supreme Court of the United States in DC. And obviously that is the 9-person Supreme Court. We now have a Republican president. We have our CEO being the first buddy of him. 6 of the judges, if I recall it right, are Republicans. So if the Supreme Court in DC would accept to take it, there is a high chance that there we get the solution we're waiting for. But that means another 1 to 2 years. So at the moment, what it is, it's over. It's not as bad in money terms as it could have been. I mean, obviously, I wished it was less, but it's by far not as bad as it could have been. And then we'll have to see how it goes in the next round. But we're actually, for the appeal, in a much better situation. Everything we've done this year helps us in the appeal. So I don't want to move on. 345 million. They had asked for 1.4 billion, or for the equivalent of 10 billion shares. So for them, it's much less than they had expected.
Yeah, I think the original concern from shareholders was that it would be potentially up to 15% of the current value of the compensation pay package, but then she ended up just going with the original grant date value, which is 2.3 billion, 15% of that. So that, at least that part of the decision is much better than I thought it was going to be. But
yeah, and actually she calculated it wrong, but it doesn't matter. It's all good. Rather have that wrong calculation than her understanding what it was going to be. But I mean, she always came across to me that's to somebody who was rigidly attached to her reasoning. I don't think she hates Elon or hates Tesla or whatever, but she has a certain vision of this world, works through point by point. I mean, nobody can say she didn't work this through. I don't like what she sees it and the way she sees it, but she wasn't, I don't think she was only politically motivated. I seriously believe that that was the best thing she could do. It's surprising to me that Delaware appreciates having a person like that as the chancellor of the Chancery Court, but I'm convinced she did what she thinks is right. And the lower attorney fees signal to me that she is, she wasn't there to compensate her old law firm or whatever, because there was some of that. Some of the connections there in Delaware between those law firms and her are at least eyebrow raising. Really, what I want to take away from this is the fact that she denied to accept the second shareholder vote was more or less written in the books. We tried. It was perfect that the shareholder vote turned out with nearly the same number of acceptance than the first one. But it was after her preliminary judgment. It was as cowboyish as possible. Like I said, Tesla's lawyer played poker, and it was beautiful to see. It was beautiful how both the retail and the institutional investors aligned behind it. But doing this 5 months after a preliminary judgment, where the only thing that was still open was attorney fees, was risky, and with somebody as rigid as her, very unlikely to happen. Now, what happens next? Obviously, on the legal side, it's Supreme Court in Delaware, and maybe if they accept it, DC Supreme Court. But there's also a plan B. I mean, while this course is still imminently linked to Delaware and maybe afterwards to the federal Supreme Court, the company has obviously moved on and moved out of Delaware to Texas. Hallelujah, by the way. I mean, it was really good, the right decision that we voted on that one. And that was, of all the votes, if really I would have to stack it up, getting out of Delaware was the more important one compared to revoting the shareholder part. So we are out now in Texas. In Texas, we can structure shares completely different. There are shares that have more voting rights, preferential shares, and so the way Tesla has now a plan B doesn't have to be as expensive as we worried if really this case gets never a favorable judgment. Again, I do believe we have a very high chance to get a favorable judgment in the Supreme Court in Washington, but that will take still time. So if in the meantime Tesla wants to put something in place in Texas, it's not going to be as expensive as people were worried about. So any other questions, I'm most happy to answer. Oh, and the other thing is Herbert pinned up there Gary's post where you can actually go to the 103 pages of her judgment of today.
Yeah, I think you did a great job summarizing all that, Alexandra. I think Tesla will most certainly appeal this to the Delaware Supreme Court, which would obviously take a while, as you said, 12 to 18 months, whatever it is. I mean, why wouldn't they at this point? This will also likely mean that Tesla would hold off on bringing forward a new compensation plan proposal for Elon until this case is finished, which, that's something we expected. But with Trump winning and, Tesla now being incorporated or based out of Texas, I don't know if Elon still feels like he needs 25% control of Tesla like he did this past January. I guess we'll have to see what he says about that. But yeah, unfortunate ruling, but this outcome was expected, I guess.
Yeah, very well summed up.
I think you guys, Alexandra, thanks. I mean, especially if we're going through like the options, what was expected, and kind of like what's path A or path B from this. I think that's super helpful for everyone, because I think people just read the headlines and it's kind of stunning that, we went through this vote and it was overwhelmingly approved by the shareholders, and something like this could happen from a shareholder with 9 shares being used as a vessel for some sort of lawsuit like this. So I appreciate you going through all of these different options. Do you think anything, like, you think in the Tesla world, in the Tesla management world, the board of directors room, do you think any of this is a surprise or anything changes tomorrow as a result of this?
Well, that's a very good question, and I haven't read the 103 pages as far as I would like to. So there's one question that is, how executory is this? How much of this is needed to happen, or does an appeal just put a veil on it all and nothing happens? Because what needs to happen are 2 things. The lawyers want to be paid their $345 million. If it goes in appeal, probably that's just going to be put on ice and we'll wait for the appeal. And is the $56 billion that Tesla has accounted for, that us as shareholders have, are lacking in the valorization of the company because they've been set aside, do they have to be put back? And hence the value of Tesla goes up a lot because those 56 billion would get back. I hope not. I hope it's just put on ice as well. But that is something I really have to study to see in detail how they're going to do it. And that's going to be a question for Tesla's board. Now, if your question was, do I think that they knew? Because obviously we had this morning, again, sales from 2 Tesla executives, from Robin and from the CFO's names, I can't remember. So anyway, so we had those. I don't think they knew anything. I mean, excuse me, if they would have known and then sold, that would be gross negligence. And I don't think anybody at Tesla does that. I think those were just, rotating sales. They get their allocation of their option packages and execute. I mean, Robin, everything, and the other people partly what they want to execute. So I don't think there's any link in timing and reasoning in there. But it is really important that we understand whether these 56 billion are put back into Tesla's pocket, meaning all our shareholder pockets, or whether they're just put on ice. And I would have to read the judgment in detail to see what she has come up with. My first 90% certitude is that everything is put on ice, that lawyers don't get their money, and the 56 billion are just standing there until the appeal is decided. But I need either a lawyer or somebody who has read more of the judgment to be sure about that one.
Yeah, I don't see Elon having to stand in line for government cheese anytime soon. He'll be okay. We just need to, we need to this needs to be figured out, and this needs to be handled appropriately. But in terms of blocking the progress of Elon and his capital moves and what he's doing with his companies, his infrastructure build out, his quest for, AI dominance and really almost achieving it here soon. Do you see any impact? Do you see any change in terms of what he or his companies would be doing as a result of this?
I mean, all his companies have left Delaware, right? So and he's going to influence a lot of people to move out. Lots of people were waiting for this final judgment to make decisions. I do actually believe that one of the reasons they got so much more institutional support for the shareholder votes was because lots of these fund management companies are actually domiciled in Delaware as well. And when you are, you have to ask yourself, do you want to be there? And they wanted to show support. And I'm convinced that once they, understood what this was all about and what to vote, I'm not talking about Schwab, of course, but all the more educated and more up-to-date fund managers, I think they changed partly their vote from 2018 to 2024 to be positive on those points because they found it was so outrageous what Delaware is doing, and because they are themselves still headquartered there. So she certainly didn't do a favor to Delaware, but I think that most of the breakage, most of her issues were already addressed in January. And you have seen the Delaware Senate having extraordinary hearings about a couple of her moves, because she this is obviously not the only of her cases. And in other cases where she also was very rigid and applying a law with, certain lens on it. So I mean, Delaware has an issue, that's for sure. If she stays the Chancery Court chancellor and continues like that, the exodus will be even more enormous than what I foresee in the next couple of weeks and months to happen.
Yeah, great point. I thank you, Alexandra. Again, thanks for going through kind of the lay of the land, the options. I'd like to open up the speaker board. We know we've had Omar Holmars join. Story, you've been weighing in. Thank you. Please feel free to. Stock Talk joined. Xander, please, Omar, I'll throw it to you first.
Yeah, well, this whole situation is just absolutely ridiculous. But just on the legal procedural issue, it's fairly normal, right? So the judge basically said, look, you can't come in after the trial's decided and say, hey, we voted. I can't consider that for one thing, right? She raised 4 different issues. So on that basis, I know a lot of shareholders are saying, wait a minute, we all voted and we said he should get to keep this. How can they just not hear us as shareholders? How can they overrule what we said? Well, she's essentially saying, look, this trial's already decided. You can do an appeal, you can do something else, but I can't really consider it here. And I mean, 326 million is still an absurd legal fee. The fact that they demanded an even more ridiculous number, I think, doesn't really change anything. That is, I mean, that's more than most people make in 10 lifetimes. And I don't think it's necessarily just. I think that shareholders spoke pretty clearly and they said that this is fair, right? I mean, it's pretty unprecedented for a shareholder vote like that, where we have nothing to lose technically, sort of rescinding the pay package, especially now that we know that it became quite valuable. He's already delivered everything. Most shareholders would probably just vote no, especially with some of the issues we were seeing in Tesla stock. Shareholders spoke resoundingly that they believed it was fair. They wanted to retain him as an executive. And, I just think about the release of FSD 13 in the past few days and what I've been seeing, and really what Elon's done as an executive, building that Cortex cluster, doing everything. And it just, I think, highlights the importance now more than ever of just making sure that he's compensated for the work he's done and that we're able to retain him as an executive going forward, as he has so many different things vying for his attention, including, running the country now. So I don't really care how they do it. Delaware Supreme Court, US Supreme Court, new federal legislation, new comp plan in Texas. I don't really, you know, understand all of the legal technicalities well enough to make a suggestion on the best way to do it, but we need to just get it done and have this be over with. It's a distraction. It's a ridiculous situation. Shareholders are clearly in favor of making sure he's compensated, doing whatever we need to do to retain him as an executive. And I hope that the appeals court judges are able to review our vote and realize that the voice of shareholders should be the number one guiding factor here. And I think people, you know, just generally being upset about it, saying, hey, look, I'm a shareholder. I voted for this. The court not hearing my vote, not hearing my voice, and overruling this at a huge cost to the company is not in support of shareholder rights. This is not saving me anything. And just sort of voicing your disapproval, saying companies should get out of Delaware, I think that kind of thing will be helpful as the appeals court reviews this case.
Completely agree, Omar. I think that's very well summed up. And you're right. The more important stuff is happening on the road, right? This is a uncomfortable distraction, but this is it now. For the next 12 to 18 months, we won't hear anything about this anymore. So if the stock reacts a bit, well, may it be. Like I said, the last little ballot points are going to be what's happening with the 56 billion. Are they reintegrated or not? I hope not. But if that's the case, that's even a positive for the stock price. And all the rest is going to happen far, far from now. And in the meantime, so many other things are going to happen. So, and again, the 345 million can be paid in stock. So that is less than 0.1% of outstanding stock that they would get. And nobody will even realize this is happening if that's really the way they do it in stock. And if they do it in cash, well, you know how much cash is laying around in Tesla's coffers. And again, I think it's just on ice until the appeal is out. So
I would suggest doing it in cash, even though it would be more expensive, just because A, we've got a record level of cash, and B, we don't want these assholes as shareholders
exactly
showing up at the annual meeting, voting their shares.
Completely agree. And they actually already said that if they would do it, they would always vote. You know how these proxy advisory firms are called? I don't recall their name anymore. You know, these assholes that always, sorry about my English, against everything. So they said they would always vote like Glass House, whatever it's called. I mean, I don't remember their names anymore. But anyway, I agree with you. If they should have no stock, that's fine. And we have enough cash to do it. And again, I don't think this payment is due now. I think this is going to go into the appeal on ice. We are in a much stronger position for the appeal. The appeal will also say, oh my gosh, they voted after the initial decision was taken. But the appeals judge will just have much more knowledge, will have understood the support to Elon. I mean, even she acknowledged in the first couple of pages where I read it that the surprising second vote should have happened earlier. Of course, should have happened earlier, but it is a sign that people are still behind it. So I just would like everybody to understand, okay, this is it now. It's out there. It's not as bad as we had feared for. It's not as good as we'd all hoped for, but we were really in a weak position, and we're actually today in a stronger position for the appeal. And in the meantime, it's Tesla's fundamentals that count and not this stuff.
Great points. I want to Appreciate you both. Omar, just stock talk.
I had a question,
Alex, Alexander. Where are you coming up with the 12 to 16 month number? I'm curious about that.
For the appeal, well, that's what the lawyers in Delaware told me.
Yeah, so I have a buddy who's a lawyer there too. He's a corporate lawyer there, and I was talking to him after this came out. He told me the average is 4 to 6 months from filing of appeal. But I don't know. I'm not a lawyer, so I guess different lawyers maybe.
Well, I mean, there is usually at least a 3. I mean, so it's 30 days to start it off. Then it's about 3 months to submit all the documents. Then they start, and since this is one of the bigger cases, people told me it's at least 6 months. So
yeah, so what he told me was that there's an expedited appeal process with the Delaware Supreme Court, and usually for any considerations over a few $1 billion in the corporate world, that they almost always get accepted for expedited appeal. And so he said it could be as short as 3 to 4 months and as long as 6 to 8 months. So I don't know. I'm not discrediting what you're saying. I also am not a lawyer, so I don't know for certain. I've never tried anything in Delaware, but
Never expect a court to move quickly. Delaware
No, yeah,
does
of course.
have one of the best courts. Like, that's one of the reasons actually people incorporate in Delaware is their court of chancery is pretty efficient. They've got great case law. But even still, a case like this is, especially now with these legal fees, is going to be hotly contested, and there's going to be a lot of back and forth, I'm sure.
Yeah, of course. Either way, I don't think the exact estimated timeline is the real main issue here. I think, for me at least, one main thing I gleaned was that the majority of and I don't know if you guys touched on this earlier before I came in, so apologies if you did, but I think for me the main issue is that the majority of the Delaware Supreme Court are Democrats. 3 out of 5 appointees are Democrats. And so, if you imagine that there's a political tinge to the situation, which I know some people think there is and some people think there isn't, I tend to think there is a little bit of a political tinge to the situation. If you do agree with that notion, then I think that that's probably not the greatest sign for the appeals process with the Delaware Supreme Court. That being said, there's obviously a chance of it to be appealed to the United States Supreme Court, which is conservative controlled. And I do not see a scenario where the United States Supreme Court would uphold this decision. And I think that's less to do with the case itself and more to do with the precedent that it sets for the notion of shareholders owning companies. Like, the companies are owned by shareholders, not judges. That's the reason we have the biggest stock market in the world. That's the reason we have year after year hundreds of billions of dollars in foreign investment in our stock market from countries that don't have those same protections and don't have that same rule of law when it comes to corporate governance. And I think that aspect of this is being overlooked not only by Judge McCormick, but is being overlooked by or likely to be overlooked by the Delaware Supreme Court when that appeal comes. So that does concern me a little bit. Do I think the likelihood of it going to the federal Supreme Court is higher because of that? I think I would have to say so. But
yeah, I agree.
yeah, this is probably headed to the United States Supreme Court, I would imagine. And
I think it's worth actually going to the Supreme Court. I mean, it would harm Delaware even more if it goes to the Supreme Court and the federal Supreme Court, and they overrule whatever they have done. I'm not so sure we have weak cards in the Delaware Supreme Court. When you listen to that, and I can re-find that and repost that to that session at the Delaware Senate, which is also majority Democrats, how furious they were with her. I mean, I've hardly seen a U.S. State Senate in so much emotion. That was because on another case she was as stubborn and had a ruling that was completely out of it as well. And they were clearly calling her out, her and her vice chancellor, saying, "You are ruining Delaware. You are making this, our livelihood," because that's what Delaware is all about, right? Domiciling companies. You're making our livelihood more and more difficult. So I'm not so sure the Supreme Court is going to go with her. But again, you're right. We don't have the best cards there. While the Supreme Court of the United States in DC is going to see it on a much more broader thing, because obviously if they rule against it, that is a huge blow against Delaware, and I think they're very motivated to do so.
Yeah, I think that's the saving grace, like you mentioned, which is this idea of the Delaware Supreme Court, in spite of them not being politically aligned with Elon, they probably are aligned with the interests of the state. And, the interests of the state are certainly not in favor of supporting this decision because, Delaware has long been the LLC capital of the United States because people feel like, the courts are efficient when it comes to corporate governance, and that, that you can kind of incorporate there from any other state pretty easily, and operate kind of without too much government interference. And that's been the whole notion of incorporating Delaware that's, caused so many people to found companies there. And so, yeah, that is at risk. And, that means that the Delaware economy, in effect, is at risk from this. So, yeah, if the Delaware Supreme Court has, any wits about them, I would hope that they refuse to uphold this decision. But, that being said, there is some level of allegiance to the lower courts as well. And the idea that they want to maintain the credibility of the lower courts. So there's a little bit of a mixed bag, I think, when it comes to the Delaware Supreme Court decision. I hope it obviously goes in our favor. But, yeah, I mean, look, this is a stupid decision overall for anyone that thinks that this was the right decision to make. And I know there's people that are like debating the idea of, and even at the time when this came up for shareholder vote, and thankfully we approved it overwhelmingly. But even at that time, there were people that thought, oh, I love Elon, but this is, an excessive pay package, yada, yada, yada. None of that is really relevant here. All that is relevant here is that shareholders own companies, judges don't own companies. And that principle has to be defended, because if you fail to defend that principle, you're opening up a Pandora's box of consequences, not only for U.S. stocks, but for investing in the United States, period. I mean, you have to maintain the confidence that foreign investors and domestic investors have that when I buy shares in a company, I am an owner in that company and not some arbitrary judge. So hopefully, either the Delaware Supreme Court or the United States Supreme Court are willing to uphold that principle.
Very well said. Very, very well said.
Alexandra, now that Tesla has officially moved the incorporation to Texas, is there recourse? Is there some sort of reissuance of a new pay package?
Yes, of course we can at any moment. The whole question is, how expensive is it? Because it was always in number of shares. And so obviously now the share value is so much higher. So the calculations that Robin Denholm had published in the Financial Times, I don't remember what it was, 30 billion or 40 billion, the number, I'm sorry, there was just so much information on this case, that it would cost now, right, to set it up again compared to what it was then. So that's one thing. It obviously depends on a point that Sawyer brought forward is, does Elon really want the money, or does he want voting rights? Voting rights is much easier in Texas because contrary to Delaware, where everything was based to what was the law of Tesla at the moment of the IPO in 2010, you could not issue preferential shares that only had voting rights but no monetary advantage. So the Delaware situation was blocked, and he couldn't have these preferential shares that gave him the voting right to 25% where he wanted to go. In Texas, that is an easy fix because obviously they have now new bylaws in Texas, and based on those, this is all easy peasy. So I a little bit agree with Omar. Now it's this is now for the lawyers to hash out how they get Elon to a comfortable position. What is the comfortable thing about it is that they know more than 70% of shareholders just voted 6 months ago, 5 months ago to support it all the way. So they can become creative because whatever needs another shareholder vote, I think people are still as, if not more, motivated to vote for it. And the creativity of lawyers is boundless. So he will get, I'm not worried at all that Elon will get what he needed. And remember how happy he was mid-June when he got out and knew that we had the votes both to get out of Texas and to support his shareholder package. I think that was much more important then, because no matter what comes now, he can count on us. So let me just get back 1 second to stock talk. If you're right that it goes quicker, even better, because if we have, let's say, in 6 months positive outcome from the Delaware Supreme Court, well, good enough, let's take it. If we get a negative outcome relatively soon, then it will move on to SCOTUS very quickly, and the earlier it is there, the better it is, given the relationship of Elon with the current administration. So if it goes quicker, be my guest. I'm just very happy about it. But in the immediate, like in the next 3 to 6 months, I don't think we will need to organize much because there's so much material already. But if we do, I know I can count on all of you to get this horse running again. There's Kristen, who was helping me so much last time, and we'll just have to make sure they hear us if they need to be heard, and that is it. Nobody should get excited today. I mean, she wrote it. These are letters on paper, 103 pages. Can you imagine writing 103 pages again and again over this? I mean, what a job this poor woman has. And then just let's move on. Let's concentrate on all the marvels we're seeing happening right in front of our eyes, and then we're taking it from there. Just this is it.
Was there any timing thing here? I don't think so. We were expecting her judgment in December, but coming the day after FSD 13, the bot demo,
the Biden pardon of his son. I mean, I don't know. There are all these theories around it. That doesn't
Yeah,
matter.
the judge was
No, of course
watching
not.
the deployment of FSD 13 and decided, no,
Of course
he
not.
has no idea what FSD
Just
is.
a coincidence.
No, I think it was it. I thought it was last week, because this is the typical lame duck period where people, throw out stuff where they hope nobody's really giving much comment to it anymore. So, well, it was today, it was a day late, but I mean, it was coming now. What's important is you have 30 days to appeal, and obviously with the year end, that means it has to happen quick, because I think this is all closed from the 24th to the 30th, and then the 2nd of January is still closed. So if they want to appeal, it has to happen in the next 3 weeks.
Yeah, I mean, the judge is not really making decisions. The judge is just there to say, okay, this is what the law says. I read both of the arguments from both sides. Here we go. So this is really kind of a non-news event in a sense, right? She's just looking at this. She's saying, well, this doesn't change anything. But overall, I think it's kind of a speed bump. Shareholders are overwhelmingly in support of that. Shareholders' rights need to prevail against the government, the legal system, anybody else, and they're going to find a way to get this resolved. So I think it'll be a speed bump overall. This was sort of unlikely just based on the law to work, given that she couldn't consider the vote. But hopefully a higher court will hear the voice of shareholders.
And again, I think it was actually in attorney fees relatively good. I mean, I'd hoped for 150 because I was optimistic. 345. It is what it is.
That's cash, not stock anymore, correct?
Well, they can. Tesla can choose how they want to pay them. It's Tesla's choice.
Great.
And again, since they're going in appeal, I think it's going to be put on ice, in escrow, whatever, just set aside and not paid out.
I mean, I don't care how you spin it. 300 million in legal fees for these assholes is not great. These guys completely fucked us in the ass. And they're saying, oh, we're trying to help shareholders. And they've put us through all this nonsense. Now we're paying them money out of the company's bank account. This is an absolutely outrageous situation. And I hope that common sense and justice prevail here. You have all these sort of legal arguments and legal procedure. And it's like, okay, well, this is how things need to proceed with the legal system. But then there's just common sense. And I think after the vote, this just flies in the face of common sense. And hopefully the justice system will sort of come to the right decision in time, one way or another.
So Elon has 13% of the Tesla shares.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah, I know the way he's the way he's probably thinking is like when he looks at these fees, he's like, oh, I could have built 12,000 Model Ys, or I could have bought 10,000 H200s or B200s. So I know the way he thinks. It's ridiculous. Like you have this capitalistic mindset of wanting to build things, and then you have this kind of system that can just come in and
bureaucrats say the word. That's exactly what it is. But again, I mean, there was no doubt in my mind ever that as long as there was a payment to these lawyers and her January preliminary judgment confirmed that Elon would appeal. There's zero doubt in my mind. He was always determined to carry this all the way, because anything in there is against what he believes. So that's just it. We're in it for the appeal.
Yep. Great input, great feedback. I know we have other speakers on the board too that have joined. I know Kristen, you joined, Xander. I don't know, Kristen, if you have any comments to add to the conversation, just please feel free.
I mean, I love that Alexandra's keeping these detailed notes so we can all keep up with all of this. Thank you, Alexandra, very much. I think just watching Elon take on Sam Altman with OpenAI just shows, I mean, we all know Elon, for the most part, is tenacious in what he does with these lawfare things that are happening, or just things in the court in general. So it's good to see that, no doubt he will be appealing, or his lawyers will, for Tesla's sake. This will be great.
Absolutely.
GP made a couple of good tweets. Maybe you want to call him up as a speaker?
I did. Yeah, JP.
Hey, hello?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we can hear
Yeah.
you.
Oh, okay, cool. Listen, I didn't expect her. She basically made a decision to defend her decision, not the legal precedent. Like, even what she says, she kind of conflates saying that the second vote was conflicted, the statements were wrong. We all know that those were cleared up. We also know that people abstained from voting, and essentially you had a repeat of the same vote. So like it was really a political move to defend her own existing juxtaposition that she put herself in. I think in reality is they'll either appeal it here, or you'll wind up with a writ of century and it'll go directly to SCOTUS. And on SCOTUS, like, those usually only go for the most significant, broad sweeping sort of cases. But Elon technically, or Tesla, I should say, because companies are people, as are the shareholders who make up the company are people. You could definitely say that the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, and even 10th Amendment are all put in jeopardy by government overreach of this magnitude relative to private citizens voting and expressing, and private companies coming to their own agreement. And, if Elon's willing to make this much stink on the First Amendment for Twitter, his lawyers could do this. And if it goes to SCOTUS, like, I think Stock Talk is right on, like, the question is like, does Denver really want to shoot itself in the foot and destroy being the LLC capital of the world? Not just, the US. It really is like the LLC capital of the world. But I think the main issue on a go forward basis, like, quietly or publicly, you will see people supporting Tesla in this case, because this sets a very bad precedent anytime anyone has an issue with executives getting paid, whether it's a public company or a private company. You want to talk about, like, it's not as well publicized. You see the headlines for hedge funds or private equity firms, what these guys get paid. If you have a PE fund that's down a year and you have a bunch of billionaire investors who can now take a case and they can go after your company or your companies, or even you as an individual, to get recourse because they think you were paid too high when you made a mistake or you failed to deliver on something. Like, this is a very big Pandora's box. And I don't think the US capitalism and or government system is incentivized to kind of destruct what's like a 200-year framework of rules for how we want to operate as individuals or as companies.
I agree with you. The one thing I want to point out, and I've explained that a lot of times in January when we got it initially, is she ruled on a technicality. That is, for a judge or any lawyer, by the way, the safest way to get to a conclusion. Rather than, we look at this in the big picture and say, look, he earned his money, he deserved it, stop this crap. She went into the digging of, how was it announced? Did they put the comma there? Did they add this and that phrase? How was it? And that's what made her so certain to just reiterate her whole technocratic reasoning and come to this solution. The fact that the attorney fees are relatively low, and any lawyer will tell you that this is much lower than what they expected, is actually a good sign. Now, will we win at the Delaware Supreme Court if this remains a discussion on technicality? No, because on technicality, as dumb as it is, she was right, okay? Or she was at least arguably correct. If we get to the final big question, did he deserve his money? And largely, if we get a Supreme Court, the one from Delaware or from DC, to finally judge on that point, then we have a very high chance of winning. So that is where it now splits. Tesla's lawyers tried to bring it to the broader picture. She closed that door every single time. And again, today, she didn't want to talk about the big picture. She wanted to talk about technicality. And that's how she found her judgment to be valid. Again, that's what we...
Alex, can I say one thing, though? I'm talking about Supreme Court of the United States. So I agree with you 100%. If it goes to SCOTUS, like proper, I think Elon wins or it's dismissed. Because the other thing, which I don't understand why no one's talking about it, everyone, regardless situation, is also entitled to an impartial jury and fair trial, whether it's civil, federal, or local. She was, at the same time of the original case, she was also presiding over the Twitter acquisition lawsuit proceedings. So Elon was on one day in front of her going through the litigation for the Twitter acquisition, and then the next week having to deal with this case. So she was seeing the same person with two different cases. There's no way for her not to be biased towards the outcome. So like you could easily make the grounds at a federal level that she was not impartial even going into this.
Yeah, and I'm sure that they're going to do that. I want to share one thing which I don't think is a problem to share. Amy Stephens did a remarkable job in mobilizing her own law team as a Tesla shareholder and bring forward their reasoning on the attorney fees that should be allocated. She told me, and I think I can share that very early these lawyers who are the best of the best told her that they're very interested in taking this on a contingency basis, meaning they may never be paid because they think it will go to the federal Supreme Court. And again, this is not me speaking. This is the best of the best who have put now hours and hours and hours of usually highly billable hours in there for nothing, because they think they will in the end win at the Supreme Court. So we just have to sit it out now.
Mm-hmm.
Omar, you have your hand up.
Yeah, another path that might be worth considering is just to essentially give up, stop litigating it, pay the $350 million or whatever it is,
Never in life.
and then just draft a new compensation plan covering the entire period. Obviously, the period the old compensation package covered, and going forward, use something like super voting shares to get him to terms that he's comfortable with, and just try and move forward with a new document
Omar,
that covers the whole period. Because the whole sort of circumstances of granting the plan and whether it was fair are under question here in the legal case. If you just start from scratch, look at the judgment, do everything properly, put it to a shareholder vote, disclose everything, then you're no longer able to question the documents, the statements, the items made during that period.
I mean, you may be right, but I think there is no chance whatsoever that Elon is sitting on this. I have heard of the last couple of weeks and months that the lawyers had reached out, the lawyers from Tornetta's team had reached out to Tesla asking to negotiate, asking to settle. And the door was closed, like closed. Now, how reliable is my source? I have no idea. But I have a real strong gut feeling that Elon would not settle, nor just take this one and walk away. I don't think so. I mean, and I agree with you. It wouldn't harm, right? That would be it and move on. But I think for him, this is much more about principle. He feels this has been unjust to the extreme, should have never been like that, should have never been ruled on technicality, should have, been, this was not a fair trial in his view. I don't think he felt the Twitter trial was fair either. And I also think he feels very strong about his chances if this goes to the federal Supreme Court. JP, go ahead.
Just two things. I agree with you, and it's not just for him. The question is, what's the knock-on effect for the next case and the precedent, the case law this becomes? So I think this is kind of against the fabric of America.
They
and
can't rule on
capitalism.
any of that, though. They have
No,
to
it
rule on
won't.
what
It
the
will-
law actually is. They can't say,
Agree.
what's this going to do to Delaware?
I
Is
understand.
Elon
No,
a good person? It's
That's
just
not-
purely on the legal issues
No,
of the
but I'm-
case itself.
Correct. But then this case becomes
But the legal
precedent
issues
for
of the
next
case
one.
are not spelled out either. in this.
Correct.
Like
Yeah, and
this is not a case where there was a violation of explicitly written law whereby this case was brought. This is a case of perceived slight against the shareholders. So there's not like a legal precedent here where we're like, hey, if shareholders approve a crazy compensation package, that compensation package should be automatically shot down. That's not what we're dealing with here. We're dealing with a subjective opinion of a judge that the board was not independent at the time of the issuance of the package. That's what's being decided here. So I wouldn't say that this is a matter of spelled out law versus opinion. This is a matter of opinion versus opinion.
correct. And now my point was
Well, the
that
law in
becomes-
question is really, was the compensation fair? Right?
No,
But that's not a
that's
law,
that's a subjective question.
Fairness of compensation is
Yeah.
not law.
And to be frank, the point which the judge doesn't articulate, and we're talking about when the trial started, what actually is on trial is at the time of the compensation package announcement, majority of the people who evaluated it thought he wasn't going to make a single dollar because it seemed so outlandish relative to where the company was. So it was actually the guidepost of saying, this is how all CEOs should get paid. You make nothing if you create no value. You make money if you create value. And I do know for a fact, because one of my very good friends' father was part of a consulting team that came into Tesla, work on this thing for like 2 years with some of the biggest consultants in the world, of if Elon wants to do an all or nothing package, what would be the most absurd way where he only gets paid if he makes everyone else rich, not him getting? Like, look at all the other CEOs of companies that go down or companies that are middling and how much they get paid. This is the complete opposite scenario. And I guess my point is, in what Stock Talk's saying here is, the objective view or subjective view of the was it fair was not impartially assessed, because it's actually not looking at the total facts. It's looking at the semantics of how this case was brought to trial. And that's kind of what Alexander's saying too, is that the procedural facts give her an out from a technicality. The actual facts don't back up the ruling. And that's why things have appeals and higher courts to go to.
The procedures on her side, from the sense of the ruling was already made, And so
Correct.
she can reiterate the ruling under the finding of no new information. So procedurally, sure, you can give her the nod. But what's really being litigated here is the notion that a state judge should be able to babysit the decisions of shareholders. That is an absurd notion. And that's what's being litigated here. So, like, the judge is making a decision that the shareholders were misled by the lack of independence of the board of directors. That is an opinion. There's nothing written in the law that says, hey, if your brother's on the board of directors, that board of directors, every decision that board of directors makes is thereby subject to judicial removal. That's a crazy thing to say. And it's also a crazy precedent to set. So yeah, I don't think this is a letter of the law case. This is a matter of shareholder opinion versus a judge's opinion. And there's some people that are making the argument that, well, state judges are put in place to protect the people. This is a massive overreach of that mandate. The idea that judges should protect people, sure, we can all nod our heads in agreement with that. But this isn't about protection of people. This is about the notion that the judge is basically saying, you're dumb as shareholders. You cannot recognize the obvious conflict of interest that exists between the Tesla board of directors and Elon Musk. And therefore, I'm going to babysit you and correct the decision that you made twice. That's insanity. And
I agree with you. And then the worst about it is, oh, but afterwards you voted again, but oh, that came too late. I can't look at that. I mean, it's just
yeah, exactly. It's stupid.
kindergarten shit. It really is.
The U.S. Supreme Court, I think the way the U.S. Supreme Court is set up right now and how conservative the U.S. Supreme Court is would laugh this case out of the room if it gets there. Because, again, the precedent is what matters here. If this court goes down in history as being the one that shot down a twice approved shareholder package by virtue of protection of the public or protection of the shareholders, you've screwed the whole goose at that point. People are going to scratch their heads wondering why they're dumping billions of dollars into U.S. stocks if that protection isn't there.
It means we're not capitalist society anymore. That's what it means. Like that's why I'm saying it's like a Bill of Rights violation. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 10. Like all of those foundational like freedoms and liberties and protections technically get broken down. And you could really make a First Amendment case too, if you really want, because the vote twice. But from a factual perspective, they could go back and say this really violates foundational American standards for how we operate as individuals and as people. And funny enough, in Delaware is where essentially the super PAC came out, where people got ruled, companies got ruled to be people. So like what happens to a company technically then applies to individuals. And conversely, right, the reason why this matters go forward is this becomes a precedent that can be used for future reductions of payments, but there's also nothing to stop. Like Jensen One could file a suit right now saying he deserved to be paid more, right? You're now saying that it's a double-edged sword in forever, because we're saying what was agreed on in a contract is no longer a contract based on government's opinion of it.
Yeah, we're 2 or 3 magnitudes away from the idea that the state should be directly involved in the management of companies. I mean, like move to China if that's what you want. And there's a reason why international investors, year after year after year, in spite of the fact that there are faster growing economies in the world, the United States still is the top destination for foreign investment, especially in equities. It's the reason we have a $60 trillion stock market, because people know, hey, look, in my country, if I buy share in some Chinese company or Russian company or Indian company, there is a risk that government overreach will violate my ownership of that company. That risk should not exist in the United States. That's why those people put their money here, because they know the rule of law in the United States and corporate governance protects the notion of shareholders owning a company. That principle in and of itself, shareholders own the company, is what is at litigation here. Shareholders own the company. We should be able to do whatever the fuck we want. If shareholders approve a package for Elon for $200 billion, that should be allowed. Shareholders cannot be babysat by judges, period, end of story. The case should end there to me.
Yeah, so a lot of interesting legal takes in this space, but obviously all court cases are based on, the written law. So in this case, we're talking really about state law, Delaware state law, and the law, the general corporation law that governs corporations in the state of Delaware. So the Delaware state law around corporations grants the board of directors the authority to manage the corporation's business on behalf of the shareholders, but that power is subject to fiduciary duty, right? So the board of directors can't just do whatever they want. They have to actually do what's in the best interest of the shareholders. And they have a duty of care to make decisions with adequate information and deliberation, and a duty of loyalty. And in this case in particular, they're really looking at the entire fairness standard. So it's really on the company to prove that they were entirely fair in sort of granting the pay package. Was this a fair price? Was it in line with market norms? Was the process of improving the compensation fair? So it's really kind of an uphill battle actually in Delaware to prove that the compensation's fair. And this is a very novel sort of compensation structure. Like I think you could argue that this is actually a great compensation structure and more should adopt it. But looking at it, it's in sort of a traditional sense in terms of the entire fairness standard and whether it's a fair price, you can see why it was a little bit of a tough argument to make. So that's really the basis in state law. And then, the bigger issue there is that the Supreme Court is probably a much more friendly venue, but they don't have a lot of ability to weigh in on issues of state law unless it conflicts with federal law. Or, maybe there was some new federal legislation passed or something, which maybe is a thing. Like if this is legal, if this can happen in the United States, maybe there should be new federal legislation that actually, guarantees shareholder rights in this ways for US securities. But yeah, that's really what it comes down to. It comes down to fiduciary duty, the board of directors. And when they proposed this plan, was it really what was in the best interest of shareholders, or what was in the best interest of their buddy Elon, who they like so much? Now, given that shareholders voted yes both times, I think it gets really hard to make the argument that the board of directors was doing something that was screwing over shareholders so that shareholders weren't behind. And I think it's really important to affirm this sort of incentive structure. I think it's actually really good for corporations in general to compensate their executives this way. So really, we talk about the principle of it, what should happen, but in the end of the day, it really comes down to these sort of pedantic legal issues that the lawyers have to argue about. And yeah, that's just kind of the way the state of Delaware is. So this is part of the reason why they moved to Texas. Texas law and Texas courts are different, and they won't have this issue if they do a new compensation plan in Texas. I mean, Texas probably has similar standards. They obviously have fiduciary duty for the board there too. But yeah, this was
But
just
the
kind of an
judges would have
uphill
a
battle
different opinion.
legally.
But see, Omar, that's my point, right? Like, I agree with you that the notion here is that this was a violation of fiduciary duty. The reason I'm saying that's absurd is because of what you just mentioned, that the shareholders themselves approved this twice. Yes, it was proposed by the board, but the shareholders accepted it twice. And so to make the argument that it's a violation of fiduciary duty is insane. It's like insane to say that. And to the extent of what you're saying, where, hey, look, the Texas courts might be more friendly, that's a concession that this is a subjective point, because Texas has fiduciary duty laws, right? So does Delaware. I think practically every state in the union has fiduciary duty laws. Okay, so if we assume that to be true, then if Texas courts would make a different decision in this case based on their opinion of whether this was a violation of fiduciary duty, that to me, not want to say settles the case, but that to me makes it pretty obvious that this is a matter of opinion more than it is a matter of written law.
Well, by the way, so the judge issues a ruling, what, in Q1 of this year, January? And then in part of this new ruling I'm reading, she's saying that the company did not materially, for the second vote, the company did not materially disclose, the open issues that led to her first ruling. So basically her first ruling is out there, it's written, it's for every shareholder to read, it's in public. And I guess what she's insinuating is we're so stupid that we didn't read it.
Yeah, and it was attached to the vote. The whole judgment was attached to the vote. I mean, this is completely ridiculous.
This is what this judge is insinuating, that shareholder, and as Alexander said, her ruling was attached to the vote with all of her issues disclosed, and that we had access to that, we could read it, and then we could still cast our vote. And what she's saying is that the 72% of shareholders are so ignorant that even after reading that ruling, that they would still vote for that. This is what she's basically saying.
Yeah, and that's why I say this is kindergarten shit, because she takes us as little kids who need Mama McCormick to help us fight this billionaire. I mean, this is completely crazy. This is not our world. She doesn't understand us. And it's absolutely crazy. Can you please call up Herbert, human lawyer hybrid? I
Sure.
think he will bring up some interesting remarks.
Any comment on what's going to happen to the stock?
Nothing should happen to the stock. I mean, if it goes down, hallelujah. I'm waiting for another point to enter. Please let it go down until January, so I have my 401k money that I can pour in it as well. But if the stock goes down for this, it's the dumbest reason to go down and a good buying opportunity. Not financial advice, Jeff. Don't overheat. I'm not saying it.
Yeah, this is, I mean, what? Yeah. We just spent the better part of an hour, honestly, going through there's so many options, as we move forward. And this is just kind of, it's kind of my summary is it's kind of like a frustrating thing. It looks like it's corrupt. It looks like it's wrong. It looks like it's not United States. It looks like it's not capitalism. But all that aside, Elon will be fine. Tesla will be fine. He will be compensated. And we will move on from this. And I think there's just a lot of learnings that come from this. But in terms of like the prognosis for the company, the focus, no, this is like, and I think Omar said it well, this is a bump in the road. You get through it and you move on, and that's what's going to happen.
Yeah, it doesn't scare me so much in the Tesla lens. The reason this scares me is because this is a weaponization of the courts, in my view. And it's exactly the way, or it's the slippery slope by which countries become China. And I'm not saying we're China or anywhere close to China, but these types of decisions where there becomes a greater and incrementally greater overreach on what the law is, right? And in this case, like Omar referenced, it's the idea of she thinks she's defending the notion of fiduciary duty. But that's a crazy thing to think in this scenario, if you're in her shoes, especially after 2 shareholder vote approvals by the vast majority of shareholders. She's either implying that shareholders are illiterate or dumb or both. And it's just, that's what scares me more, is the idea that this can be done so flippantly at the state court level by weaponizing a small claim from a shareholder of less than 10 shares and blowing it up into not only $375 million in plaintiff attorney's fees, which was formerly multiple billions, but now also shooting down, the largest pay package in history for one of the craziest 5
Hey guys,
years.
we just got some breaking news that Tesla is going to officially appeal the
There
ruling.
you go. They already applied.
Who told you? Who told you?
Tesla just posted it on X.
I love it. I love it. I mean, that's just the way it has to be. He was not going to take this. He's not negotiating. He's fighting this until the last. And we should be happy about that. I mean, I'm sorry. And you're right, Stock Talk. We should be happy because it's in Tesla's interest, but we also should be happy because this is in America's interest. I'm an immigrant. I want this country to be run like the enterprise it is and used to be. I don't want this to become a socialist state where a judge mommy decides what shareholders should or should not take. I'm beyond that. I don't want that. I come from Europe. This is done. Human lawyer, yours.
Yeah, Judge Mommy is actually a great summary for this whole case. That should be the title of every news article written about this. Judge Mommy. That makes a mockery of it in and of itself, because that's what this is.
Hey guys, I apologize. I wasn't able to get here sooner, but I have been listening and heard some legal takes that might not be totally rational. I mean, I do understand everyone's concern. I'm totally with you, but I just don't think it's as out of line as people are saying. I disagree with the ruling, but this is the way our system works, and we couldn't have capitalism at all without a system of laws that enforces certain restrictions on on everyone, including boards of directors and CEOs. And what she's there's a whole lot of legal issues. I haven't read the whole ruling yet, so I don't want to opine as to exactly what's going to happen. But uh, I will say that one of the things that she's saying is not that all of the shareholders are stupid, but whether or not a fiduciary duty has been breached is not the same as saying that shareholders approve or disapprove of something. I mean, those are two separate issues. I mean, you could imagine, for example, that somebody who, like your accountant, takes all of your money and buys or takes it to Vegas and puts it all on 32 and wins a ton of money. And then the question is, did he breach a fiduciary duty? Well, you might after the fact say, oh well, I'm happy with this result because I made a bunch of money, but that wouldn't mean that taking that money and using it in that way wasn't a breach of his duty. Uh, so there's just or for example, you could have somebody who um, approved of a particular compensation package because they felt threatened or they felt like they were, being coerced in some way. Not to say that that's what happened here, but the point is, there's a separate question, uh, a separate legal question as if a fiduciary duty was breached compared to did the shareholders approve of this action? So I don't think it's quite as state of affairs. Um, and she's not like I disagree, but it's not a completely inappropriate thing. Like when a judge has a novel state of affairs, they have to try to figure out what the proper procedure for dealing with it is, and it is not out of line for her to say, well, look, um, the proper way to deal with a ruling like this is not to go back to the shareholders. I actually think it was appropriate, but it's not like that isn't an ordinary decision that a judge would be within her discretion to make based on the fact that this is a novel issue. There aren't rules of procedure that specifically deal with this. And so I'm not as concerned about the ruling either, because there's um, the fact is, even though these judges do, decide the cases before them, based on the facts and law in the case, they're not immune to considerations of larger issues. There's a famous case of Marbury versus Madison, which I won't get into all the details, but the it was one of the first major Supreme Court decisions, and the genius behind it was that the Supreme Court ruled in favor of President Madison, because the Supreme Court at that time did not have enough clout to ensure that it could enforce its rulings. And the idea was, well, we're going to make the statement that we do have the authority to rule on this, and we do get to decide this, but we're going to decide it in a way that's favorable to President Madison, So he's going to go along with it, and suddenly we're going to have we're going to have set ourselves up to have more authority going forward, to be the ultimate arbiters of what is constitutional. Uh, and that kind of consideration is going to come into play here with the Delaware Supreme Court, because by moving the corporation out of Texas, uh, the Tesla has not freed itself of the jurisdiction of Delaware courts by any stretch, but it has created an opportunity to have a fight about it. And even though there's a lot of reasons that that would be messy, Delaware does not want to, the Delaware Supreme Court is not going to want that to become a major issue. And so they will do their best to find a way to resolve this without it coming down in a way that Tesla is absolutely going to fight to the bitter end. Because the end game here, if Tesla really wants to go to the mat, you appeal to the Delaware Supreme Court, you try to get the US Supreme Court to hear it. If the US Supreme Court won't, then you say, okay, well, it's your judgment, enforce it. And meaning we're a Texas corporation now. You don't get to decide who owns our shares, and then you have a series of court battles as the attempt to collect this judgment plays out. And the Delaware Supreme Court is not going to want that.
Interesting. Thank you. Thanks for going through that. It's always interesting to hear, the interpretations of this, especially, legal interpretations. I appreciate that. So it looks like Tesla is appealing this ruling right away. Elon has posted, this is absolute corruption. And, I hope every, public company CEO, especially the ones that are set up in Delaware, they put out a statement of support. First off, I'm sure they're going and looking at their own compensation agreements with their boards and making sure that they're, in tip top shape now. So they definitely, they're benefiting from this in some way in terms of learning. Hopefully they also put out a note of support to Elon. I know I would, especially if I'm trying to get anything done over the next 4 years, knowing his position. It's just the facts. You can say it's unspoken or spoken or not, but those are the facts. So I hope other corporate CEOs at least look at this and say, "Wow, this is unbelievable that this could happen in America. That shouldn't happen in America. Understand that there are legal interpretations of things. Got it, but at some point, common sense needs to take hold, and it doesn't look like it did here." Got it. Who else on the speaker board has a question or a comment? Any other news that's broken in the last 10 minutes? Herbert? Host your space, Herbert. You can't speak, or I can't hear you.
One other big picture, if we're waiting on Herbert, one other big picture item that's relevant to this is there's been a crisis, or at least some have said it's a crisis of CEO compensation getting out of controls that since the 90s. And I think part of the reason that this case happened is because Chancellor McCormick thought this was an appropriate case to try to set some limit on CEO compensation. I think she was wrong. Ironically, I do think there is some level of a problem with CEO compensation. But this was exactly the wrong compensation package to choose to go after it. And it superficially looks like an appropriate one because it was so high. But when you realize that there was no guaranteed compensation, it's really the least of our worries as far as excessive CEO compensation, because the bigger problem to my mind is guaranteed compensation, even for CEOs that dramatically underperform or even lead a company into bankruptcy. So it's kind of funny to pick a compensation package where the company has to perform extremely well in order for the CEO to get paid anything, and to hold that one up as the one to try to limit.
Right. Okey doke. I know we're trying to add another speaker here. If there's any questions, we'll look at the questions too in the comments. If there's any other additional questions or anybody see anything in the ruling that's kind of unique or worth calling out.
I'm sorry,
we-
I was out for a while. I just got a message from a law professor who is really good. He's gonna go through the ruling and sum it up for us, and I'll work with him. So just wait a couple of hours until we have that. But I mean, people that have read this and that are, neutral to Tesla, that are not, in any way, they all think this is absolutely crazy. So, and I think that's what the general public will take from this. Whether she's right on the technicalities, be it, right? But the overall image, and I think Stock Talk summed it up so well. This is so un-American. And that's what will be left. The fact that she may be right that there was a comma missing, or a notion of Kimball being the brother of Elon in 2018, yet not anymore in 2024, but that she wants to ignore, is just so wrong. It's just so wrong. So I'm so happy we're going into appeal, and I think we have a very strong appeal.
Absolutely. I mean, the shareholders are behind this. Shareholders have been actually fully disclosed. They had the opportunity to read her ruling. They've had the opportunity to continue to know that Kimball is Elon's brother, as you said, and
What?
I think common sense. Yeah, can you
His
believe it?
brother?
Yes, Kimball Musk is the brother of Elon Musk. It's one of the key takeaways from this space and from the ruling. Okay. Other comments? Like I said, I mean, Tesla has several options. They've obviously filed a swift appeal from this. Business as usual tomorrow. The Cortex cluster is going to be doing training jobs. FSD version 13.2, or maybe it's a 13.3, is going to be in progress of getting to wide release. And they're still cranking out cars for the quarter, probably a record quarter. And they've got the most exciting product portfolio, not only in the auto industry, but probably in all of tech, arguably, especially when you look at it from a product, hardware and software perspective. So none of that changes with this ruling. And if anything, the gap between where Tesla is and the competition is actually honestly grown over the last year. If you just look at it, and I even did a post on this earlier, that the battle's actually happening in these AI factories and data centers where Tesla, and even XAI, but Tesla are just they're bringing this product in, and they're commissioning these AI factories. So first it was gigafactories and building cars, and now it's AI factories. Now Tesla has a distinct advantage at building out and ramping an AI factory faster than anyone else as well. It's not even close, especially anybody in the auto industry. So none of that actually changes with this ruling. So I think investors should read the ruling, understand it, understand some of the great options in terms of next steps that were discussed in this space, and appreciate all of what the speakers have had to contribute. But that's the way I see it. This is tomorrow the sun rises and it's business as usual.
Exactly. Very well summed up.
Yeah, I'm reminded of that scene from A Few Good Men when Tom Cruise goes, I object, and then the judge says move on, and then he goes, I strenuously object. And it just seems like all of this is already priced in. There was a very small reaction back down to 350 after hours, and it's already recovering. And really, it's un-American. From the way I've looked at it, I just think it's a judge that wants attention. I know there's obviously Richard's a lawyer, and but it is completely illogical that a supermajority vote gets overturned by one woke judge, and that really has to stop, because Stock Talk's point regarding investment in America, how can anyone trust that the will of the people, as we saw with the U.S. election, if you're going to call people idiots, that doesn't work. So I think that ultimately this will get overturned and everything's going to be fine.
Yeah, it's going to be fine. It's all going to get worked out, and it's really nothing for any of us as shareholders to stress over.
Got
That
it.
is so true. And in the meantime, I prepared the delivery of my Cybertruck on Thursday. So let's go, Tesla. That is it.
Lots of product being delivered. So yeah, we're going to shut this down, and want to appreciate everybody listening that tuned in. Please, follow the speakers, the hosts, everybody kind of, did research and provided, I think, valuable input to you and everyone. And it's available. It's free. You can do with it what you want, by the way, but I think it's helpful information, but you decide what to do with it. But, just thank the hosts, the speakers, and everybody for their input. And thanks everyone for listening and just, going through this together. So anyway, again, sun rises tomorrow, business as usual. Nothing changes in the Cortex supercluster, FSD, and cars cranking and coming off the line. So anyway, thanks everyone.
And more than 17,700 people listen to us one way or the other on X, on YouTube, on whatever. I mean, this is phenomenal. We probably have more viewers than CNBC at this hour. So very proud of all of you, and listen to next instructions, because maybe we need to get active again. Thanks to all. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Alexandra. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.